From the shores of California, the Pacific Ocean looks harmless, a wide blue stretch where sunlight dances and waves gently break. But beauty is only the surface. Out past the shipping lanes, past where land disappears, the Pacific becomes something else, something ancient, something patient. U.S. Coast Guard veterans often say the same thing, quietly, never on record. The ocean doesn't rush, it waits for you to listen. This is where the first story begins. A sailor who wanted silence. In the summer of 1982, Michael Reeves, a 34-year-old American sailor, left San Diego alone. No crew, no escort, no rush. Michael wasn't chasing adventure, he was escaping noise. Recently divorced, emotionally exhausted, and desperate for control, he believed the Pacific would give him what land could not: silence. His sailboat, the Mariner's Hope, was modest but dependable. Michael had served as a Navy mechanic years earlier. He trusted machines. He trusted preparation. What he didn't understand yet was that the ocean doesn't care how prepared you are. The first wrong night. The first 6 days were calm, too calm. The sky stayed clear, the water rolled in predictable patterns. Michael wrote in his logbook that the Pacific felt flat, endless, and polite. On the 7th night, that changed. The wind shifted direction without warning. The waves stopped matching the sky. There was no storm, no drama, just a subtle sense that the ocean had lost its rhythm. Michael noted one line in his logbook. Feels like the water is thinking. At 2:14 a.m., a sharp crack tore through the darkness. The mast snapped. In one violent second, the Mariner's Hope stopped being a journey and became debris. Michael tried the emergency radio. Static. The antenna was gone. By morning, the storm had vanished, and with it, every sense of direction. Adrift. Days blurred together. Michael rationed carefully. He collected rainwater. He stayed disciplined. During daylight, the Pacific was blindingly blue, empty, almost peaceful. But night transformed it. No moon, no landmarks, no sound but water touching fiberglass. On the 9th night, Michael heard something that didn't belong. At first, it was faint, almost mistaken for imagination. Then it repeated. Low, smooth, rhythmic. It wasn't random noise. It had intention. Michael leaned over the edge of the boat. The water below was black in a way that felt unnatural, less like darkness, more like depth without bottom. And from that darkness came music. Not words, not language, a melody. Slow and calm, like a lullaby meant for someone very tired. The pull. Michael pulled back instantly, heart racing. There was no rational explanation, no nearby vessels, no radios, no marine animal that could produce harmony like that. The sound stopped the moment he stepped away. That should have terrified him. Instead, something worse happened. He felt disappointed. The music returned the next night and the night after. Always after midnight, always gentle, always patient. Michael noticed how his body reacted. His breathing slowed, his fear faded. The ocean felt closer, less hostile. In his logbook, the writing grew uneven. It doesn't feel dangerous, it feels familiar. By day 14, Michael stopped fighting the urge to lean over the water. On day 15, he tied a rope around his waist before approaching the edge. Later, he admitted something chilling. Part of him hoped the rope would fail. What moved below? That night, the music changed. It wasn't alone anymore.
multiple tones layered together, harmonizing. Michael saw movement beneath the surface, long, smooth shadows gliding slowly, never breaking the water. They weren't circling, they were waiting. As soon as fear spiked in his chest, the music stopped, like something had noticed his resistance and was disappointed. Rescue, but not relief. On day 27, a U.S. Coast Guard patrol plane spotted the Mariner's Hope drifting far off course. Michael was alive, but barely. Dehydrated, sunburned, shaking. As they pulled him aboard, he grabbed one of the crew members and asked a single question. "Did you hear it too?" The official report blamed auditory hallucinations caused by extreme isolation. Case closed. Almost. Because as the cutter passed the abandoned sailboat, a sonar operator quietly noticed something unusual. A consistent underwater sound pattern directly beneath the vessel. Not biological, not mechanical. The note was filed and never investigated. What the ocean taught him. Michael survived because he didn't listen all the way. Because at the last moment, fear returned. But the Pacific doesn't always fail. Sometimes it doesn't sing. Sometimes it simply waits until the silence inside you grows loud enough to answer back. And this was only the first voice.
The Pacific Ocean doesn't attack quickly. It waits. It lets time do the work. And when a human is left floating long enough, the ocean doesn't need waves or storms. Silence is enough. The night the ship burned. In October 1996, Daniel Foster, an American longshoreman from Southern California, was working aboard a privately owned U.S. supply vessel operating deep in the Pacific. It was routine, familiar, safe. Until fire broke out in the engine room just after midnight. The flames spread faster than anyone expected. Thick black smoke filled the lower decks. The ship began to list. Daniel never saw the explosion that finished the vessel. He only remembers the heat, the scream of metal, and the sudden cold when he hit the water. By the time he surfaced, the ship was already dying. Within minutes, it slipped beneath the Pacific. What remained was silence and a single one-man emergency life raft drifting nearby. Daniel pulled himself onto it. By sunrise, there was nothing else left. Week 1. Hope floats. The raft was barely larger than a dining table, a square of rubber, thin walls, a low canopy that trapped heat during the day and cold at night. Still, Daniel was alive. He rationed water. He waited for rescue. He believed in systems. Planes would pass. Ships would come. During the day, the ocean felt manageable, blue and endless, but calm. At night, it felt closer. The water touched the raft constantly, small taps and presses that reminded Daniel he wasn't anchored to anything. Still, hope remained. Week 2. Movement. By the second week, Daniel noticed something changing. Not the ocean, himself. The nights grew longer. Sleep came in fragments. His mind stayed awake even when his body shut down. That's when he felt it. Movement beneath the raft. Not sudden, not violent, deliberate. The raft shifted slightly, as if something large had passed underneath and displaced the water. Daniel checked the edges. Nothing surfaced. Later that night, the tapping began. Not random waves, patterns. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Always from below. Daniel stopped sleeping completely after that. The shape that followed. On day 17, the water beneath the raft darkened, not with storm clouds, with depth. Daniel leaned over the side. He saw a shadow moving slowly beneath him, longer than the raft itself, smooth and steady. It didn't circle. It matched his drift. The shape stayed just far enough below the surface to remain unclear, close enough to be intentional. When night fell, the tapping returned, slower, heavier, as if something was testing the raft. Daniel screamed until his throat burned. The ocean didn't answer. Week 4, the ship with no name. On day 24, Daniel saw lights on the horizon, white, steady, low. A ship. Relief hit him so hard his hand shook, but as it approached, something felt wrong. The vessel was old, its hull shape outdated, no engine noise, no wake. Daniel waved his arms, shouted, fired his last flare. The flare lit the ship's side. No name, no registration, no crew on deck. It passed him slowly, too close, close enough for Daniel to see rust and peeling paint. Then it vanished into the darkness. That night, the tapping stopped. The silence felt worse. Week 4, conversation. By the 4th week, Daniel no longer spoke to himself. He spoke to the ocean. He apologized for screaming, promised to stay calm, promised to rest. The ocean stayed perfectly still, too still. On day 37, he heard a voice, low, even, gentle. "You can rest now." The words didn't echo. Sound over open water always echoes. This didn't. Daniel understood something then. The ocean wasn't forcing him. It was waiting for permission. Rescue. On day 40, a U.S. Coast Guard cutter detected Daniel's life raft during a routine Pacific patrol. When they pulled him aboard, he barely reacted. He kept staring at the water. A crew member asked what he was looking at. Daniel whispered, "It stayed." The official report listed severe dehydration, sleep deprivation, and stress-induced hallucinations, but a sonar technician noted unique sustained movement beneath the raft at depths inconsistent with normal marine behavior. The note was filed and never followed up. What remained? Daniel survived, but he never returned to the ocean. He later said the worst part wasn't fear. It was how reasonable the voice sounded. Because once the Pacific starts talking back, it doesn't need you to pull you under. It only needs you to stop resisting. There is a point at sea where survival stops being physical. Food still matters, water still matters, but the real battle moves somewhere else, inside the mind. U.S. Coast Guard psychologists have a term they rarely use outside closed rooms: isolation feedback. It happens when the brain, cut off from human input, starts creating its own. This is the third story: the fisherman who wouldn't turn the radio off. In 2010, Tom Harrison, a commercial fisherman from the Central California coast, set out alone for what was supposed to be a 2-day trip. Tom had done this run dozens of times. Same boat, same route, same radio. But on the second night, his engine failed. Not catastrophically, just enough to leave him drifting. His radio still worked, and that may have been the worst part. Day 1. Familiar sounds. At first, Tom stayed calm. He radioed for help, logged his position, deployed his anchor to slow the drift. He wasn't afraid. Not yet. The Pacific rolled gently. The skies stayed clear. The radio crackled occasionally, normal interference. Tom left it on. Silence at sea feels heavier when you know it's coming. Day 5. The wrong voice. By the 5th day, Tom noticed something strange. The radio was speaking when no transmission should have been coming through. Not clear words. Fragments. A breath. a syllable, a half-formed sound. At first, Tom laughed it off, atmospheric interference. But the sounds began responding. When Tom cursed, the radio crackled. When he went quiet, it stayed silent. It felt aware. The voice that knew him. On day 9, Tom heard a voice clearly for the first time. It wasn't loud. It didn't come through the speaker. It came from behind him. "You should have stayed in." Tom spun around. No one. The radio was off. The voice returned later that night. It used his name. Not Tom, his childhood nickname. A name only his mother had used. His hands shook as he turned the radio back on, desperate for static, proof of reality. Instead, the radio stayed quiet. The voice didn't. Day 12. Negotiation. Tom stopped calling for help. He started listening. The voice never threatened him, never demanded anything. It commented. It advised. It reminded him how tired he was, how calm the water felt, how easy it would be to rest. Tom argued back, out loud. That's when he realized something terrifying. The voice answered immediately. No delay, no echo, as if it wasn't traveling through air at all. What the Coast Guard found. On day 18, a U.S. Coast Guard patrol spotted Tom's boat drifting far beyond its expected range. The engine was intact. Fuel remained. There was no mechanical reason the boat should have stayed dead. Tom was found sitting upright, radio unplugged, staring at the horizon. He didn't react when they called his name. It took 3 attempts before he turned. His first words weren't relief. They were confusion. Why did it stop talking? The interview room. During post-rescue evaluation, Tom was cooperative, calm, too calm. He explained everything logically. The voices, the conversations, the sense of being observed. Doctors labeled it stress-induced auditory hallucination, compounded by isolation. Then, Tom said something that ended the interview early. He asked why the Coast Guard had changed tactics. The psychologists didn't understand. Tom explained, "Before you showed up, the voice told me you were coming. It said you wouldn't listen, and that I shouldn't tell you everything." The room went quiet. The pattern becomes clear. 3 people, different years, different circumstances, but the same progression. Silence, perception, response. First, the ocean makes itself noticed. Then, it listens. Then, it speaks. Not loudly, not violently, but intimately, as if it's learning you. And once the mind begins answering back, the ocean doesn't need to say another word. What Tom still refuses to explain. Tom survived. He returned to land, but he never fished again. He keeps his radio unplugged. He sleeps with lights on. And there's one question he has never answered. Why, on the night before rescue, did the voice tell him, "Next time, we won't let them hear you"?
Not every story from the Pacific is told. Some aren't hidden because they're dangerous. They're hidden because they don't fit. They don't break rules. They don't violate laws. They simply refuse to be explained. This is one of those incidents. The exercise that went wrong. In 2003, a small U.S. Navy contracted research vessel was conducting routine acoustic testing in a remote section of the Pacific. This wasn't combat, not surveillance, not intelligence gathering. The mission was simple: test underwater sound propagation, how noise travels, how it bends, how it fades. There were 6 people on board, all American, all cleared, all experienced. Nothing about the operation was classified. What happened afterward never officially existed. The first anomaly. On the second night, the ship's sonar operator noticed something unusual. A sound. Low frequency. Rhythmic. Repeating. At first, it appeared to be biological. Whales produce complex patterns. But this wasn't migrating. It wasn't moving. It stayed directly beneath the vessel, perfectly centered. The operator adjusted sensitivity. The sound adjusted back. Matched. The reaction no one expected. By the third night, the crew began complaining of similar symptoms: sleep disruption, vivid dreams, a feeling of being watched, specifically from below. One crew member reported hearing faint tones through the hull while lying in his bunk. Another described it as pressure, not sound. The captain ordered a temporary halt to testing. The ocean went quiet. Too quiet. The sonar operator noticed something worse. When the equipment was turned off, the sound continued. Faint, but present. The voice in the water. On the fourth night, something changed. The sound shifted frequency. Higher, closer to the human hearing range. That's when one of the junior technicians spoke up. He said he could hear words, not clearly, but with intent. The room laughed it off, until someone else said they heard it too. Different words, same source. Below the hull. Always below. The captain logged it as a group stress response and ordered everyone to stay inside. No one slept. The log entry that ended the mission. At 0237 a.m., the sonar operator recorded something that stopped the operation entirely. The sound formed a pattern, not random, not biological, structured, repeating sequences that mirrored the crew's own internal test pings, but delayed by a fraction of a second, like an answer. The final log entry before shutdown read, "Whatever this is, it's not echoing us, it's responding." At dawn, the captain ordered an immediate return to port. No testing completed, no data submitted. Aftermath. The crew was separated for debriefing. Psyche evals followed. The official conclusion: shared auditory hallucination induced by environmental stress and prolonged isolation. Standard, clean, dismissive. But one detail never made it into the report. All 6 crew members interviewed separately described the same final sensation before departure: a sudden absence, as if something beneath the ship had realized they were leaving and let them go. Why this matters. Michael heard music. Daniel felt presence. Tom heard voices. This crew heard response. Something that didn't just exist, it interacted. And unlike the others, this wasn't a drifting survivor or a broken mind. This was trained professionals, multiple witnesses, active instrumentation, and still, the explanation was the same: hallucination, because the alternative would require admitting something uncomfortable, that the Pacific doesn't just distort perception, that sometimes, when we listen closely enough, it listens back. The unanswered question. The Navy never returned to that location, not because it was dangerous, but because there was nothing more to measure. They had already confirmed the one thing they weren't looking for. Some sounds don't travel through water. They wait in it.
The Pacific Ocean is often described as empty. Endless water. No landmarks. No witnesses. But emptiness is not the same as absence. And after listening to enough survivors, enough logs, enough reports that end with the same word, hallucination, a different picture begins to form. Not of monsters, not of ghosts, but of something far more unsettling. The pattern no one wanted to see. Individually, each story was easy to dismiss. Michael Reeves heard music. Daniel Foster felt presence. Tom Harrison heard a voice. A Navy crew recorded a response. Different people, different decades, different circumstances. But when Coast Guard psychologists later reviewed these cases together, quietly, unofficially, a pattern emerged. The Pacific Ocean is often described as empty. Endless water. No landmarks. No witnesses. But emptiness is not the same as absence. And after listening to enough survivors, enough logs, enough reports that end with the same word, hallucination, a different picture begins to form. Not of monsters, not of ghosts, but of something far more unsettling. The pattern no one wanted to see. Individually, each story was easy to dismiss. Michael Reeves heard music. Daniel Foster felt presence. Tom Harrison heard a voice. A Navy crew recorded a response. Different people, different decades, different circumstances. But when Coast Guard psychologists later reviewed these cases together, quietly, unofficially, a pattern emerged. Not in what was seen, but in when it happened. Always after prolonged isolation, always after silence stretched too long, always when the human mind began searching for connection, and always in the Pacific. What isolation really does. Extreme isolation does something specific to the brain. It doesn't immediately create fear. First, it creates openness. The brain lowers its defenses, searching for signals, any signals to replace missing human input. Sound, movement, pattern. In normal environments, that openness is harmless. At sea, it's dangerous. Because the Pacific is not silent. It is full of low-frequency sound, pressure waves, vibrations that travel farther than light. Most of it exists below conscious perception, until the mind is quiet enough to notice. The uncomfortable theory. One retired Navy acoustics specialist, speaking years later, off record, suggested something unsettling. That the ocean may act like a mirror, not for sound alone, but for intent. Not intelligent in a human sense, but responsive. When a person reaches a certain level of isolation, their brain begins projecting patterns outward, and the ocean, vast, conductive, endlessly patient, returns them. Not as echoes, as feedback. Not speaking first, but answering. Why the experiences felt personal. Every survivor reported the same detail. Whatever they heard or felt wasn't hostile. It was familiar, comforting, tailored. Michael felt calm. Daniel felt invited to rest. Tom felt understood. The Navy crew felt acknowledged. This wasn't fear-based interaction. It was permission-based. The ocean never forced them. It waited until they were ready to listen. Why some people never come back. Officially, thousands of people have been lost in the Pacific. Ships vanish. Aircraft disappear. Signals stop. Most are explained by weather, by error, by distance. But not all bodies are missing because they sank. Some were never found because no one was looking anymore. Because once a person stops resisting, there is nothing left to rescue. The final Coast Guard note. There is a line buried deep in Coast Guard survival training materials. It isn't emphasized, it isn't explained. Just one sentence. Extended isolation may produce the sensation of presence. Do not engage. Not hallucination, not illusion. Presence. Why the Pacific keeps its secrets. The Pacific doesn't chase ships. It doesn't pull planes from the sky. It doesn't need to. It waits until distance does the work, until silence stretches long enough, until the human mind, desperate for connection, opens itself, and something answers. Quietly,
patiently. Not to everyone, only to those who are truly alone. The last thought. If you're ever far enough out, where the horizon disappears, where radios go quiet, where night feels heavier than it should, and you hear something that feels personal, don't lean closer. Don't answer. Because the most terrifying thing about the Pacific Ocean isn't that it's empty. It's that it isn't.